Oh, praise his name to me. Brighter the way grows every day from sin and doubt. Oh, praise his name. He is my King. A wonderful song he is to me.
You know, whenever you hang around a preacher, you better be careful because he may end up using you for an illustration. You may say something or do something that he can turn into a lesson or a way to emphasize a point. Now, sometimes you get some of those as a preacher and you really want to use them, but you don't necessarily want to say who it's from. You know, you may read something by an author you don't particularly like, but he makes a good point. You may hear a piece of advice from someone who you don't think much of, but good advice is good advice. It's funny how wisdom can be found in all kinds of places, even in the most simple ideas. You know, we sing a song to our kids, oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little ears, what you hear. Be careful, little mouth, what you say. Be careful, little hands, what you do. Be careful, little feet, where you go. Why? For the Father up above is looking down in love, so be careful, little whatever you do. You know, that's some pretty good advice. It doesn't matter if you're 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 50 or 70. The wisdom that's found in those verses is very true. The Bible teaches us that the eyes of the Lord are in every place, watching good and evil. See, the Father up above is looking down. He sees us. And so we need to be very careful what we do and what we don't do. Being careful means watching our steps. Being careful means assessing the danger. And unfortunately, we're not always so good at that. We think we know what harms us, but what we get scared of harming us usually isn't the thing that harms us, right? We get scared if we're up too high, right? But people don't often fall from great heights unless they're doing something really ridiculous. But still, we're nervous about that, but we don't get near as nervous as we go back for second helpings, and heart disease and obesity is killing a lot of people. The things we get nervous about aren't always the things that we should be worrying about. We aren't always careful about the things that we should be careful about. But the song wisdom contained in that little children's song is one that I want to talk about today. 5 points of wisdom, 5 places you should be especially careful. As the song says, be careful, little eyes, what you see. We don't think much about it, about what we watch, what we see. We just think, well, that's what's in front of us and it doesn't affect us and it's no problem. But the Bible teaches us something different. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6 and verses 22 and 23, the eye is the lamp of the body. So when your eye is clear, your body will be full of light. If your eye is bad, the whole body will be full of darkness. If the light that is in you is in darkness, then how great is that darkness? See, the eye is the lamp of the body. It's what illuminates us. It's what brings us and tells us what is in our world. And if our focus, if what we see is bad, well, that can make everything bad. You know, science backs this up. In 2011, they did a study where they had some people come in and they made them watch a video. Some people watched an episode of a television show that involved a character who acted rather like a buffoon. He was a soccer hooligan, trouble, and drank too much, and got in arguments and got into fights. A typical, something we might see on television today, we would get, just buffoonery. The other episode was something similar, but the person in that story was not the imbecile. He acted responsible, did things that were right and good. And afterwards, both groups were given an IQ test, basic facts, quiz of basic facts and knowledge. Now, what was interesting is the group that watched The dumb guy act dumb did a lot worse on the test. Now, the show contained none of the answers. It wasn't like you watch the show and you watch it carefully, it'll give you the answers. It had nothing to do with that. It just was simply the fact of what you watch is how you think. That's a very microscopic effect, but it's bigger than that. Because it's what we focus on, it's what we think about. Before Jesus said that the eye is the lamp of the body, in the previous verse of Matthew chapter 6, verse 21, he says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You see, what we see is what we focus on, and what we focus on is what comes into our minds and goes into our heart. And when it fills our heart, that's where our focus becomes. The more we look at bad things, the worse everything seems. That is the paradox we exist in our world right now. The situation our country finds itself in, whether it's in health and welfare or politics or all these things, if you look and compare it, it's really not as bad as we think that it is, but we sure think that it is because that's all we see, because that's what we watch, because that's what we involve ourselves in. The more that we see it, the more that it permeates our society, the more it filters into everywhere. See, all it takes is for that idea to be put in our minds until it starts coming out through us. You get out what you put in. So it's important to be careful what you see, to make sure that you are not allowing darkness into your eye and filling your heart. We need to be very careful that we don't constantly fill our brains with things that change our thinking. It's very easy to flip on the news and watch the same thing over and over again and become to all kinds of negative conclusions, all kinds of negative ideas. It's very easy to look at things that are negative and bad, and next thing you know, you think that's what everything is. We need to be careful what we see, what we take in. Not just what we see, but what we hear. Be careful, little ears, what you hear. Because you see, it's not just what we see, it's the words that we hear, the ideas that are expressed. And in doing so, they can lead us away from God. In 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verses 15 through 17, Paul writes Timothy there to be a good student, to be diligent in his study, to present himself as a workman that does not need to be ashamed, accurately handling the word of truth. But notice what he says in verse 16, but avoid worldly and empty chatter, for it will lead to further ungodliness. Be careful what you hear, Timothy. It can lead to further ungodliness. He continues in verse 17, he says, their talk will spread like gangrene. And he gives us a couple of specific people who were making that talk. People who were claiming to be Christians, but were saying things that were not very Christian. And he says that their words spread like an infection. Once they get in that wound, they take over. Once they get into the body, they infect everything. And that's why he tells that you know what's real and what isn't. That you know the Word of God so you can see what's not. And don't listen to the chatter. Don't listen to the worldliness. You know, there's a idea that we get sometimes of, we have to understand maybe false doctrine. And it's true that we need to not be afraid to listen to things, but we also need to be very careful that we don't become so involved in them that they take over. I remember years ago, a preacher mentor of mine, we were talking about a book series that had come out that had dealt with some religious themes that were very unbiblical. But it was very popular at the time, and I told him I was thinking about reading them just to find out what was going on. And he said, you can do that. He said, but I've always found I hate to read too much of that stuff because he says it gets mixed in there with what I do know, and the next thing I know, I have that idea in my head and I can't get it out. I thought that was some pretty good wisdom. See, all religious teaching isn't equal. All religious teaching isn't good. We sometimes think, this person's talking about spiritual things, and therefore it will be beneficial to me. But sometimes what we hear isn't very good. It's a disease. It spreads and changes our thinking and our ways, and we need to be very careful what we hear. Lies sometimes seem to become truth because of repetition. Enough people say it over and over, we begin to believe it, even when it's not true. That's why we need to be careful what we hear. Careful what we hear, that we don't give it a weight that it shouldn't have. That we don't listen to it so much that that chatter seems to become reality. But it's not just what we hear. We need to be careful what we say. Oh, be careful, little mouth, what you say. I don't know if we realize how significant what we say is. The Bible teaches us very clearly that our words are meaningful. Matthew chapter 15, verse 18, the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile the man. See, the people of that day, they were always thinking about what you touch, what you're around, that's what could defile you. But Jesus said it's what comes out of you that can defile you. Your words can defile you. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 36, he says, "But I tell you that for every careless word people speak, they will give an accounting for it in the day of judgment." Every careless word. The language of the text there describes a word that's said, and it's not, you don't mean anything by it. That's what we'd say, I don't mean anything by it. Jesus says you mean something by it, because you're going to give an accounting for it. You see, that opinion that we throw out there, that retort that we make, it's going to be counted against us. There is a reckoning. The Father up above hears it, and He will call us to task for it. See, what we say matters. Years ago, I heard someone say, what is worse, to tell a lie or to repeat a lie? Well, obviously, you think to tell a lie, right? Because if you tell a lie, you're obviously trying to deceive somebody. You know something's false, and you're saying it, but you're repeating a lie. You may not know. Somebody may have told you something, and you just repeated it, and you didn't know. So it obviously can't be worse. But the statement was said this way: the problem with repeating a lie is that it has the ring of sincerity to it. See, when a person tells a lie, they know it's not true, and there's something about that makes it difficult sometimes to see, but also sometimes there's a ring of sincerity that you know that's not true. But when we repeat others' lies, we give it that ring of sincerity. That's why we need to be careful what we say. Just because we heard something, just because something was presented, doesn't mean it's something that we should say, because we don't necessarily know that it's true. And what we say has repercussions. The words we repeat, the words that we utter, have power. Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 12:11 that God will bring every act to judgment, everything that is hidden, whether good or evil. We may not think much about it, but God does. And those words have actions. Those words have power. They affect things. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 12, verse 37, by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. We are taught and we believe that certain words said have the power of salvation. I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that good confession has the power to save. Do we not also think that our words can have the power to condemn and destroy and set us under the road to destruction and hell? We need to be careful, little mouth, what we say. We need to also be careful what we do, what we set our hands to. You see, words have power, but words lead to actions. Words lead to things that we do. And what we do is important. What we don't do is just as important. You know, Paul would write to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 13, a problem that was occurring in the early church. And that in the early church, there were those who were widows who were being taken care of by the church. But not all women who had lost a husband can be considered that widow that they were helping. There were some who were young enough and able enough to marry, to move on, that they probably shouldn't be taken care of in the same way. Paul warned the reason for that in chapter 5, verse 13 of 1 Timothy. At the same time, they learned to be idle, going around from house to house, not merely idle, but also gossips and busybodies, talking about things which are not proper to mention. Why was he concerned about these women? Well, because they had nothing to do. They were doing nothing. And doing nothing can be one of the most dangerous things that you can do. Because very rarely are we doing nothing. We're doing something, but it's not something good. And that's why we need to be careful what we do. Christianity is not a religion where your hands are to be set upon. They are to be put to task. There is work to be done in the kingdom. All of us have something to do, and we need to be careful that we're doing it. And we need to be careful that the things that we are doing are good and productive. Titus chapter 3, verse 14, we read, "But our people must learn to engage in good deeds, to meet pressing needs, so that they will not be unfruitful." See, Christians, if we think that coming and sitting for a few hours, walking out a door is the end of our Christian duty, we need to be careful with our hands of what they're doing. Because that leaves us a lot of time to be idle, a lot of time to be unfruitful, a lot of time to be unproductive. We need to be careful to engage in good deeds, to meet pressing needs. I like the way that that's said there, pressing needs. Because, you know, we can find a lot of things to fill our time that don't do much of anything. One of my favorite quotes is, "There is nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all." Ever had a project that you're just working like everything to do? Something that you're trying to get ready, and you get done of it, and you say, "Here it is," and they go, "Oh, well, we don't want to do that anyhow." And you think, was I wasting my time? But you know, many people do that in their lives. They're wasting their time really busy. With a lot of effort, their hands are busy. But what good is it for? Who is it helping? How is it advancing the cause of Christ? We need to engage in good deeds to meet pressing needs. We need to make sure that the things that we are doing are actually what God would see and be proud of. We need to be careful, little hands, what we do. We also need to be careful where we go. An old joke about the guy who went to the doctor and said, "Doctor, I broke my arm in 2 places." The doctor looked at him and said, "Well, don't go to those places." We know. There's be. A preacher friend I mentioned before, he told me a story. He worked in the heating and air business besides preaching, and he had to go to all kinds of places to fix air conditioners and work in different people's home. And the place that he often bought parts from was in Arlington. We were in Bedford, and you could spend the whole day driving over there, even though it wasn't very far as the crow flies, because of the traffic. You had to get on the interstate and go around. Well, he had found a little back route, and it was great. If you needed to get down there quick, it was just kind of these roads that nobody went on, and you could shoot down there and get there. The only problem is there was nothing on that road. As soon as you left the edge of Bedford, it was just one of those weird places in the Metroplex where there was just kind of bunch of nothing, except there was one establishment halfway there. And it was one of those establishments that you hear the phrase, "I wouldn't be caught dead in." Well, it was one of those. They served a lot of beverages that you shouldn't drink. They had a lot of action going on that you wouldn't want to see. Anything you wouldn't want to see, wouldn't do, wouldn't want to hear, it would be there. Well, one day he was driving back from getting parts, and his truck started making a noise. And it was not a good noise. And he said, I limped along till I got to that parking lot. And this was in the day and age before cell phones. And he said, I knew I needed to call somebody to come and help me. But he said, I knew I had to walk into that place. And he said, there's my truck with my name on the side in the parking lot. And he said, I just knew as soon as I got out there that this road that nobody drives down, here would come about 5 members of the church. And look over and go, oh, what is he going in there for? Right? Because you wouldn't want anybody to see you there. There are places we wouldn't want someone to see us in that we're going. And I'm not just talking about physical locations, but spiritual destinations. Places we go that aren't really leading us in the right direction. You know, when you think about a relationship, you think about, you know, a lot of the things that we do, let me give it directionally. They move us east to west. We can go over here, or we can go over here. It's just moving back and forth. But in our relationship to God, north and south, we can go east or west, and it doesn't change that very much. And we can kind of just do what we want to do. Do I want to do this or do I want to do that? But there are certain decisions that we make that move us closer to God, or they move us further away from God. They move us north or they move us south. And what we need to think about where we're going is we always want to be moving north. And it may be okay to move a little bit east or a little bit west, but what we need to make sure is in that movement east, it's not southeast. And that movement west, it's really northwest. Because we always want to make sure it's moving us closer to God. And if we find ourselves involved in something, going somewhere, doing something that we think is taking us left and right and it's really bringing us down, we need to realize that that's not a direction that we want to go. Are the people that we surround ourselves bringing us closer to the Lord or further away? Are the activities that we're involved in doing the same thing? Where we go and what we do, what direction is that taking us? Because if it's not taking us upward, if it's not taking us closer to God, what good is it to go that way? Now, we may make decisions, there are certain things that have a neutral thing. I understand that, but we still need to view them about what direction they eventually will take us. Do they take us to a path that allows us to go northward? Because sometimes we do something that's neutral, but when doing so, it cuts off a lot of the roads that move forward and move up. We need to be careful where we go. And to realize that when we find ourselves at a place, that God is there with us and God is there watching us. Is that kind of place that God would want to be found? You see, we need to be careful of what we see, what we do, what we hear, what we say, to take us away from God. Satan is attempting to move us away from God's will. But Satan can't move us. We have to let him. Last week I usually would be at camp. But because of the virus, we didn't have our session this year. And one of the things we always do at night at camp is we have a thing called Kismet Capers. And it's basically a combination of a talent show and skits and jokes and silliness that we just have fun with. Over the last several years, I have done something for the kids, and it's called Barry's Challenge. And Barry's Challenge, I get up and I give the chance for the kids to throw a pie in my face. One of those nice, heavy, whipped pies, shaving cream pies. They like to do that, if you can imagine. But to do that, they have to beat me in a challenge. And these challenges they're tricks. And unless the kids get really clever, they usually can't beat me. But usually once a year, one of them gets away with it. But I always have some good ones that fool them. One of my favorites is where I take a glass of water and I set it down on the table. And I take off a hat and I put my hat over that. And I said, I can drink that glass of water without touching that hat. And they look and they think, well, there's no way you can do that. There's no way you can pick up the glass. And they look under the table. There's no way to get to it. They do that. So I'll usually make a big show, and I'll either get out a straw or I'll stick my face right around it, and I'll make a deep breath and act like I'm drinking and I'd say, I drank the whole glass. And I said, so I won. You don't get to throw pie in my face. Well, then they get upset and they say, no, you didn't. I said, yeah, I did. I sucked it. I just brought it all out of that thing. You know what they'll always do? They'll pick up that hat and look. And as soon as they do, I reach in, I grab that glass of water, and I drink it. Works almost every time. Because they got to move that hat. That's what Satan has to do. He's got to get you to move that hat before he can come in and operate. He's got to get you to go somewhere. He's got to get you to say something. He's got to get you to do something in order to get to you. And there are things that Satan doesn't want you to do. Satan knows that in God there's a protection. That he can't get to you unless he can get you to behave a certain way. See, but there's also things that Satan doesn't want you to do. He doesn't want you to see the plan that God has for him. He doesn't want you to know how salvation is found. He doesn't want you to hear the truth. If you see the plan, he doesn't want you to hear and listen to it. He wants you to dismiss it and turn it away. He doesn't want you to say what you need to say. He'll get you saying everything else other than confessing Jesus Christ as Lord. See, if he can't get you to hear, you can't have faith, because faith comes by hearing. If he gets you to say something else, he can keep you from speaking the words that can lead to salvation. He doesn't want you, desires of you. He wants to tell you you can do a whole bunch of other things rather than the thing that needs to be done. He wants you to say salvation can come lots of ways when Jesus says that he who believes and is baptized shall be saved. You see, he wants you to stay right where you are. He doesn't want you to go anywhere. Because he knows if he can get you to stay where you are, that really what you're doing is you're moving further away from where you need to be. Because God has a destination for you, a place in heaven. But to go there, it requires us to hear what he has said. It requires us to do what he tells us to do and say what he's told us to say. We need to be careful that we're doing what we need to do. If we don't, we'll never get where we want to be. I don't know where you are in your spiritual journey today. I don't know if you have done the things that you need to do, if you've put your belief in the one who can save you, if you've confessed him as Lord, if you've turned and moved away from the direction that leads apart from God in sin, turned back to God in repentance. I don't know if you've had your sins washed away in baptism, the action that God tells us to do. I don't know if you're going in the wrong direction, right direction. Maybe you've said something you shouldn't have